I hear a lot of is people will say, well, I don't know why I'm not losing weight, right? And I'm sure that you hear this too. But when they become honest with their habits and they expose their habits, the truth is maybe you had 3 cups of rice, even though you said you had one. And actually, those other 2 cups while you were standing at the kitchen table, eating while you were measuring your food, that counts.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a reason why you have to become diligent and track. And there's also a reason why you have to become honest in your habits. Or, even when you think about adding in training to the equation, exercise.
Yes, we haven't even talked about that yet.
Right. You can go to the gym and say you're going to exercise, but if you're on your phone and doing all this stuff, it's great if you're training for Instagram and you're not really being honest with the push-ups or the quality of the work that you're doing, then you're never going to get the results that you want. You cannot be angry at anybody if you're not getting the results for the work that you're not putting in.
For me, if you're not getting the results for the work you're putting in, you just need to start asking more questions.
Or you're not getting the results for the work that you're not putting in.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, that requires honesty.
Yes. And sorry, I wanted to add one more to this list is the acceptance of imperfect consistency. So I see this a lot. Here's a hypothetical scenario. I ate a bowl of ice cream, 300 extra calories. Oh my gosh, this wasn't in my food plan. I am a terrible person. First of all, a lot of negative self-talk. I'm a terrible person. I'm just going to eat the whole tub. It's not worth it. I'm throwing in the towel. Forget it all. A person who is so perfection-oriented, that is the action that happens because they're expecting perfection from themselves, which is fundamentally unrealistic. They let themselves down, and then they allow emotion to take over: guilt, disappointment, shame, all of these things. Someone who's accepted imperfect consistency will say, well, all right, I just ate an extra 300 calories I didn't need. I'm going to do better on my next meal, or I'm going to reset tomorrow morning when it's a new day. And they prevent themselves from then eating the 1,200 extra calories that actually ruined the entire week.
Right.
So it is also about giving yourself grace, but in a way that is a little bit controlled. So yes, it doesn't have to be perfect, but you need to be consistent enough for long enough. And a lot of black or white thinking is what gets people in trouble. And a lot of it has to do with the emotions they experience.
Yeah. And at some point, how do we eliminate the emotion so that people can have freedom? Because ultimately, we don't want you to have to do this forever. We want you to have freedom, emotional freedom. I remember when I was in my early 20s, I was very obsessed with doing this. And I had to get it right. It had to be perfect. I wanted to be this % body fat. And there was so much pressure that I was putting on myself that it consumed so much of my thinking. I wasn't able to enjoy going out with my friends or just having a freedom of thinking to be able to do something else. Because I was constantly thinking, if I could just lose these 3 pounds, then it'll be great. As opposed to understanding that you take the action, you do the thing, and it's not about being a good or bad person. It's you made this decision or you fell off here, and then you make the next decision.
Right.
When you are putting into place these macronutrients, does it matter if someone has 1 meal or 2 meals? How do you think about meal dosing over time?
That's an interesting question. Again, with the protein, I think it's about the individual. It's always about the individual because at the end of the day, we're designing a way of eating that works for this specific person. If it's 1 meal, we try to make that meal as good as it can possibly be.
But friends, that's not ideal.
Not ideal.
We don't want you having 1 meal a day.
Not
ideally.
No.
Right.
But maybe there's a day of the week where that actually happens. Then we start working on, okay, if you're put in a position where this is a kind of a unavoidable reality, what does your meal need to look like? Because then you have a plan. But really, it's like 3 meals a day is probably where we'd start for most people. I really personally, as a practitioner, don't love skipping meals.
How come?
I think it's a lost opportunity to eat protein, which is a lost opportunity to gain the benefits of protein from a muscle perspective. And I just fundamentally think that a lot of people think not eating is the way to weight loss.
It backfires.
It backfires. It always backfires. When you put yourself in a position where you're in a either extreme calorie deficit or you go too long without eating, your body has a really intuitive and almost uncontrollable way of setting you back to homeostasis. You're going to overcompensate on the other side. So not allowing yourself to get in those situations where you get either hangry or you're not eating enough. Or
Never happened.
Yeah. Or you're going too long without eating is probably a good sort of way to be. That's not to say that you can't feel hungry sometimes. I think those two things are really different. I don't think, I think a lot about like what our ancestors have done. What have hunter-gatherers done? We wouldn't have always had 3 square meals a day with 30 grams of protein and 8 grams of fiber per meal.
Wait, we don't?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I do think there's something to be said for letting your digestive tract rest and not always eating. I think I read somewhere that now we spend, I think it's 17 out of 24 hours eating. So that means that you're only giving yourself, 7-8 hours of digestive rest. I think there's something to be said for shortening that window, maybe 12 plus hours where you're not eating, especially a little bit before you go to bed, is probably a good habit to get in, just allowing some time where your body's not allocating resources to digestion so much.
And it makes sense, right? Circadian entrainment.
Yes.
People talk a lot about light, and we've talked about light on this podcast for setting these biological rhythms.
Mm-hmm.
One of the big setters is food.
Food and exercise.
Yes.
Both can influence circadian clock or muscle clock.
How important is consistent meal times?
That's a really good question. I think it does help people because once you get into a structure, it's a lot easier to adhere to. It's sort of like a circadian rhythm in a lot of ways. So if you go to bed at 8 o'clock one night, 12 o'clock the next night, 7 o'clock the next night, your growth hormone production, the coordination of all of your cells in terms of its cyclical rhythm, it's unpredictable. So nothing is going to be optimal because it doesn't know whether you're going to go to bed at 8 or midnight or what. And so I feel like the same is for food because it entrains your circadian rhythm. Getting into a little bit of a schedule, I think, is probably a good thing overall. And also from an execution standpoint, it makes things a lot easier when you know you're eating at the same times every day and that your meals need to look more or less the same every day. You can mix it up in so many ways within that framework, but I do think from a practical aspect, it makes things a lot easier.
I agree. The less chaos, the better.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. I'm going to steal that.
Go right ahead.
The less chaos, the better.
The less chaos, the better.